I'm Charles Lin, 2019 Fellow of ALI, and I'm the lead of the Climate and Energy Impact Group, which was formed a few months ago, and it's now up and running with a few members, with a few of you on the uh, on the committee. Now, Mongabay, I run a nonprofit outreach to Canadians on climate change and energy transition. And when the Texas floods occurred, I wanted to find some flood data around the world which would put the Texas floods in some perspective. And guess where I wound up? Mongabay. And it was a wealth of information with flood episodes around the world, and with details that are provided. And what I learned was that in 2024, there was well over 100 flooding episodes. And there's a map that you can click on to find more details. And most of it occurred in the global south. So that was very useful information. So I certainly found it very useful. And I think one of the slogans that Mongabay uses is that they are an environmental organization with a global reach and yet a regional focus. And my experience certainly confirmed that. So that's my introduction to Mongabay, my personal introduction to Mongabay. And I look forward to this webinar, and I think we're all in for a treat. So I'm going to pass the mic to Linda.
Hi, everyone. Very briefly, I'm Linda Dakin-Grimm. I was a 2020 fellow, and some of my fellow 2020s are on the Zoom, which makes me happy. I'm just supposed to tell you how Gary and I, my husband, came to Mongabay, which is through work that we've been doing at the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School on the issue of infrastructure of information. It's just become really clear to us that none of our various problems and passions will get solved with the siloed information distribution system we're living in. We met Rhett and Dave Martin at an event that the Shorenstein Center held, and we're just immediately fascinated, and it sort of dovetails into our interest in climate and animals. And the information infrastructure. So enough from me. There are lots of ways to get involved that people will talk about later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Charles and Linda. With that, I wanted to dive into the presentation. So I'd like to introduce our CEO and founder, Rhett Butler, and I will pull up a slideshow to share.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and have this opportunity to talk with such an esteemed group. So I'm going to start with a basic overview of Mongabay before jumping in. So at a high level, Mongabay is an environmental news service that covers issues at the intersection of people and nature in what we call impact geographies. Next slide, please. So we do this via a team of about 125 staff across about 30 countries and a network of nearly 1,000 contributing journalists in roughly 80 countries. So many of these journalists live and work on nature's front lines. So that can mean deep in the Amazon rainforest or in coastal communities in Indonesia. We've organized around 5 regional bureaus. So we have a global English bureau. We have India, which is currently in English and Hindi. We have Indonesian for Indonesia. We have Spanish for Latin America. And we have French, which is primarily targeting Francophone Africa, so West and Central Africa. And then we have a team in Brazil that reports in Portuguese and English. Next slide, please. So our reporting includes written articles, audio podcasts, and videos. These are published on our website and via various social media channels. All of our articles are published under an Open Creative Commons license, which means they can be used by other outlets at no cost, either commercially or non-commercially. So that means that other for-profit media outlets can freely monetize our content. So as a result of this approach, we have more than 100 mainstream media outlets around the world that syndicate our stories. And so this greatly amplifies the reach of our stories beyond the roughly 5 million people a month who come directly to our websites. Next slide, please. The reason we do this is because we place a very strong emphasis on impact. So I'll get into this more later, but in short, our goal is to inform key decision makers whose choices have an outsized impact on wildlife, ecosystems, and the communities that depend most directly on nature. Um, so by allowing other outlets to republish our stories, this increases the likelihood of reaching our target audiences. So you may ask what we mean by target audiences. So there's a list on the slide here. Mongabay doesn't have a typical user. Instead, we're going after specific user groups. And so on this list, there's a variety, but it ranges from private sector, so people who are managing commodity supply chains, usually for corporations, thinking about investment decisions, to philanthropic institutions, to the people who make decisions that have an outsized impact on natural resources management. So those could be people who work in the agencies and ministries that manage natural resources. It could be the overseas development agencies that channel a lot of conservation funding abroad. Also includes practitioners and activists. Next slide, please. So that's a high-level background. We've structured this presentation into 4 parts. So the first is the origin of Mongabay. The second is how journalism drives impact in the world. The third part is a case study from Latin America by the head of Mongabay Latam, Isabel Torres. And then the fourth part is where we're headed as an organization. Next slide, please. So one of the first thing people ask me about Mongabay, besides my name, is how did it get started? And so I had the great fortune of having a mother who's a travel agent and a father who traveled a lot for business. So that many had a lot of airline miles. And so my family prioritized travel growing up. And I always had a special interest in reptiles and amphibians. And because the tropical rainforests of the world had the greatest diversity of reptiles and amphibians, I would lobby my parents to someday take me to the rainforest. So the first time I had a real rainforest experience, next slide, please, was in the Amazon in Ecuador, Eastern Ecuador specifically, very close to Yasuni National Park, which is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. So this park is very famous now for its high levels of species. And we stayed near the park in a fairly traditional, oops, can you go back a couple? Yeah, thanks. So we stayed in a fairly traditional community near the park. And I immediately went out with the kids my age in the village, and we looked for frogs and catch fish and had a really amazing time. I came back, and a few months later, there was a story in the San Francisco Chronicle about an oil spill that had happened upriver on the Rio Napo. And so what that meant is this area I had visited was now coated or affected by an oil slick. And so I wondered what had happened to my friends in the forest and the animals. And so that's what moved me from someone who was into cool frogs to a person who tracked environmental issues in the news. Next slide, please. The thing that spurred me to action happened a few years later when I was in high school. I had the opportunity to go to Sabah, which is a part of Malaysian Borneo, a very beautiful rainforest. Next slide, please. So this forest is full of all sorts of amazing creatures, including amazing lizards and frogs, but of course, birds and insects. And I had a really special experience at one point where a wild orangutan passed over my head and felt like a special moment for me. And so I kept in correspondence with the scientists there after I left. Next slide, please. And I learned that forest is going to be pulped to make paper. And so that was really devastating for me. So it would go from looking like something like this to the next slide, please, to looking like this. And so today that area is an oil palm plantation. So that forest no longer exists. And so the destruction of that forest led me to want to raise awareness about what was happening in tropical forests and why they're important. Next slide, please. So in college, I started writing a book about tropical rainforests. My major was a combination of economics, math, and business, so it really had nothing to do with this, but it was my passion. So I worked on the side. Thankfully, I found a professor who was very excited about this project and gave me some independent study credit, which allowed me to finish college a year early. And so I spent that year finishing the book. I found a publisher. The publisher was excited about the book, but it came back to me and said, look, we don't have the budget to put photos in this. So it's effectively going to be a textbook. And to me, that defeated the purpose of what I was trying to do, which is convey the beauty of rainforests and why we should save them. So I thought, well, I didn't write this book for money. I wrote it for impact. And so I decided to put the text online so people could read it for free. Next slide, please. And I decided to name the site Mongabay, which is derived from the name of an island off Madagascar. Next slide, please. So this island is kind of my idea of paradise. It's a tropical forest island that's full of all sorts of incredible creatures, from lemurs to chameleons to leaf-tailed geckos. It's also surrounded by coral reefs, and there's a breeding population of humpback whales in the bay right there. It also had a really interesting story arc because this forest had actually been cut down centuries ago, but it had come back, and so it showed the resilience of nature and the ability of these systems to recover. The other part of the story was nearly, or I guess it was 70, 80 years ago, the French scientists thought that this one species of lemur was going to go extinct in Madagascar. And so they started to relocate this lemur to this island as the last refuge for it. As it turned out, the scientists hadn't really communicated with local people, and this species was very widespread. So it wasn't actually going to go extinct, but it was just kind of another element to the complexity of the story around this island. Next slide. But the reality was I was going to run a website for a living, so I started working in Silicon Valley for a startup. But my passion remained Mongabay, and I kept working on the site nights and weekends. And then in mid 2003, I put advertising on the website. And because the site was popular, it started to generate revenue. And so within about 6 months, the revenue was equal to about half my take-home pay. So I decided to quit my job and pursue my passion. Next slide, please. And so one of the first things I did was create a section for children that was translated by native speakers into about 40 languages. And so this was all about rainforests. Next slide, please. I also started taking photos everywhere I went, so I wouldn't have a problem of not having images to illustrate my writing. And so I now have about 200,000 photos on the website. Next slide, please. And then I created the environmental news service because I saw this gap in the market between advocacy publications, which had great information but tended to tell you what to do or think, and then mainstream media, which had some excellent coverage, but it was kind of few and far between the number of stories about tropical forests. And so I saw this gap that I felt like something like Mongabay could fill. And so Mongabay is now best known for this news service. This has really taken off. Next slide, please. So the first 2 years of Mongabay was just me in my pajamas writing stories. I was very prolific. Eventually, I hired another staffer, and there were two of us. But there were all these ideas I wanted to pursue that wouldn't be supported by an advertising-based business model. And so I decided to form a nonprofit specifically to pursue one of these ideas. Next slide, please. Which was creating an Indonesian language news service for Indonesia. So that may seem very esoteric, but I had done a lot of reporting in Indonesia, and I realized that a lot of the environmental degradation was driven by corruption or mismanagement in the natural resource sector, and that there weren't good environmental news services in the local language that covered Indonesia. And so this is an obvious gap to me. So obviously I'm not Indonesian, I don't speak Indonesian, but I thought if I could bring together resources and hire some really great journalists, this could potentially contribute to a real world impact. And so thankfully I was able to get a grant. I announced that I was going to do this thing, had a lot of interest, and then hired a team in Indonesia. Within a month of hiring the team, we launched the website. And within a month of launching the website, it was the most popular environmental news service in Indonesia. And pretty quickly, the president of Indonesia was citing the site. Mongabay Indonesia team was getting invited to, press conferences, which the mainstream media in Indonesia were doing. So it rose very quickly and became a success story. Next slide, please. And so then over the next few years, we replicated the model in other markets. So Spanish for Mongabay for Latin America, Hindi and English for India, and then Africa 2 years ago, which is currently French and English. Next slide, please. And so this just shows trajectory of growth. We've been just steadily but consistently expanding over the years. Next slide, please. And again, this goes back to the map of where we have a presence. And this is actually 2 years old now, so it's since expanded. But you can see we're especially strong in the tropics, and over the past 2 years, we've significantly scaled up our presence in Africa as well. So those numbers would be higher. Next slide, please. So I want to get into the real thrust of this presentation, which is how journalism can contribute to real world impact. So next slide, please. So Mongabay's expansion has occurred during a time when many media outlets have been shrinking or shutting down. And so these are headlines for a couple of years ago, but we're consistently seeing everything from very local media organizations to nonprofit news to some of the biggest news outlets in the world who are laying off staff. And so one of the reasons we've been able to consistently grow during this period is because of our operating model. Next slide, please. So moving from an advertising-based for-profit to a nonprofit required a fundamental shift in how we worked. So effectively, we went from selling ads to an emphasis on impact. So this focus on impact has enabled us to make decisions that a for-profit entity probably would not make. For example, the sheer number of readers has become less important than what those readers do with the information they consume. So I'll get more into that in a moment. But first, I think it's important to establish what I mean by impact. So our theory of change is predicated on the conviction that journalism doesn't shape our world. Environmental reporting can close information gaps, drive accountability, and spark change. Next slide, please. So at a most basic level, journalism raises awareness of critical issues. So it can make complex science and policy understandable for target audiences by connecting abstract issues like forest governance to tangible impacts. So the benefits that forests have for water, food security, and health. One way we think about this in Mongabay is how do you make deforestation newsworthy? Like how can you make it so that people care about this and how it ties to them? The other aspect of it is by bringing in underreported local realities to a global stage, it can raise issues that might otherwise go unnoticed. Next slide, please. Journalism also, especially investigative journalism, can hold power to account. So investigations expose wrongdoing, can challenge misinformation. So this work can trigger consequences for various parties, whether that's authorities who are raiding an illegal timber operation or a company that's adopting a zero deforestation commitment after reporting it has exposed forest clearing in their supply chain. Journalism can also provide a form for protection for civil society, exposed individuals and marginalized communities by documenting abuses. Next slide, please. Journalism can supply trusted, evidence-based information to key decision makers. So this can function as a bridge between researchers, practitioners, and the public. So what I often say is Mongabay would have a much smaller role in the world if all scientists were good communicators. And so we can be that bridge between the science and the people who make key decisions. Next slide, please. So showing how environmental issues connect base of people who care and push for change when it comes to protecting nature. So telling stories in local languages and through local voices can also build trust. So for example, Dave Martin, who's on this call, was randomly speaking with some indigenous people at an event. They didn't realize that Dave worked for Mongabay, but they told him about media outlet that they trusted to get their stories right and to tell their stories accurately. And so that was really interesting to hear. And when it comes to communicating science, people are more likely to trust science if they understand. So being that bridge that translates complex science into everyday insights is quite valuable. Next slide. Uh, Another key thing, which I think is often overlooked in journalism, is that it can inspire.
I think we're having a little bit of connectivity issue. Rhett, can you hear us? It looks like he's frozen.
Inspire people and provide hope. And so, especially among younger generations.
Hi, Rhett. Just
Okay now?
FYI, you were cutting out on that last slide, so we missed some of that. If it's easier, we can just move forward, but we'll let you know when you're frozen again.
Oh, sorry about that. Which slide was that? Was that the broadening?
This is the inspires and provides hope.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just start over because it's only like 20 seconds. So I think most people are aware that eco-anxiety is a growing problem, especially among younger generations. And so the problem with eco-anxiety is it can cause a state of paralysis with people feeling like they're overwhelmed by the challenges we face and they really can't do anything. So balancing crisis coverage with stories of solutions and resilience can demonstrate that change is possible. And so this can give people a sense of agency and creativity instead of despair and disengagement. So it can become a rallying cry for, little victories or little wins that can catalyze broader movements. Next slide, please. And a good storytelling that engages audiences and establishes trust can help counter disinformation and polarization, which is obviously a major issue now. And so this is important because it keeps environmental issues as part of civic discussions. It can help societies navigate complexity and try to find common ground across sectors. So I put an emphasis on storytelling because facts alone won't move many people. It's often said that facts inform, but stories move. And so people are more likely to remember an anecdote or a story than a number or a figure. Next slide, please. So I'll share a specific example of that in a moment. Before I do, I wanted to go into a couple implications of this shift of going from ads to impact. And so one of the big things is about audience. And so impact is not just about, it's more about who we reach rather than how many people we reach. And so reaching the right decision makers greatly multiplies the effect of journalism. So sometimes it's just one policymaker, funder, or industry leader making an informed choice that can outweigh millions of passive clicks or people watching a video. So for example, if there's illegal logging in a national park in Bolivia that's being facilitated by the mayor, shining a light on that issue can lead to a direct change and a direct impact because it's very clear why that activity is happening and who's responsible for it and what the remedy is. The other aspect to this is that quality connection can create feedback loops. And so by engaging directly with practitioners, policymakers, or communities, you can not only influence them as journalists, but you can also learn from them and get that feedback into the system. So you can get story ideas, you can get tips and things like that. And so it really sharpens the relevance and credibility of journalism. Next slide, please. So distribution. So secondly, as a nonprofit, it doesn't matter where people find our stories as long as they do. So as I said before, syndication is really important for this because our interest is reaching people, not monetizing them. And so we give away our stories for free. So beyond syndication, we also think about the platforms that drive durable relationships. So we're less interested in the platforms that may drive a whole bunch of traffic, but it's superficial traffic where people don't actually do anything with that information. And so our focus on producing high quality original content over multiple channels has allowed us to be a lot more resilient. So We've avoided gimmicks like search engine optimization and clickbait, which has really shielded us from the whims of algorithm and platform decline. So as where a lot of outlets have experienced a decline in traffic, Mongabay has continuously seen this growth in traffic. So like our readership over last year is up about 40%. So it's been a very successful approach for us. Next slide, please. And then going back to that platform is really prioritizing that quality engagement over the fleeting volume. So again, views in and of themselves are not impact. It's the meaningful engagement and use of that information in decision making that drives impact. So a few years ago, we made the decision to deprioritize Facebook, for example, even though at the time it accounted for about 80% of our traffic or external referral traffic. Because we'd analyzed the data, we found that people were not really staying on the site very long. They were bouncing quickly. They weren't viewing many pages. And we also anecdotally heard of less examples of people reading something on Facebook and then taking an action. Whereas like in 2010, there would be something to be posted on Facebook and then a minister would respond to it. That just stopped happening. And so we decided to shift our focus to other platforms like LinkedIn. And so we had this big drop in kind of the superficial traffic number, but the amount of time people spent on Mongabay's websites actually increased. And so it was really interesting to see that that focus on quality of engagement far outweighed the total traffic numbers. Next slide, please. And so we measure tracking a couple ways. You look at both the quantitative impact, which is easier to measure, so syndication, readership, story count. Next slide, please. And then the qualitative, which is much harder to track, but it's what happens after we publish a story. And so we don't necessarily attribute all that change to Mongabay's reporting, but there's often evidence of how a story has helped inform decision makers who then made decisions off that. Next slide, please. So quickly, I just wanted to go through one case study. It's one of my favorites. So this is from several years ago. There was a company that went public called United Cacao. Next slide. And people were really excited about it because at the time, cacao prices were going up as they are now. And this is the only publicly listed pure play cacao company. And it had this really good story that it was restoring the rainforest and working with communities to produce this commodity that most people love. Next slide, please. We weren't paying attention to that. We were using satellite imagery to monitor change in forest cover, and we saw these areas of deforestation popping up in the Western Amazon, which is the most biodiverse part of the most diverse forest in the world. And so we started digging into this data. And next slide, please. And we could see that this change was happening very quickly. So we sent an investigative report in, and it turned out that this company was actually clearing this forest, this primary forest, for their cacao plantation. So they were misleading the public and investors about what they were doing. Next slide, please. So if you zoom in, you can see that the tree with the satellite, you can see that the tree's down. Next slide, please. Fly around with an airplane, you can see clearly this is not forest anymore. Next slide, please. And then if you're on the ground, you can see that, yes, trees are getting cut down. So this is all important for establishing the baseline. So we move forward with this story. The company, a large US law firm reached out to us telling us they were going to sue us out of existence if we published a story. I countered with, well, you don't have slander or libel because it's all based off the best scientific data. I also noticed that your policy around environmental issues representing this company seems to violate that, and you also champion yourselves as a free speech law firm. So it seems like this is not congruent with what you say you're doing. And so it turned out the law firm actually dropped the company as a client. We move forward with the reporting anyway. Very quick. Next slide, please. Eventually, the company was delisted from the London Stock Exchange after there was this outcry around this activity and a bunch of activism that built off our reporting that was unrelated to our reporting, but built off it. And the company lost its permits, and so it wasn't able to move forward with a plan to clear nearly 250,000 hectares or acres of forest. And so that has huge climate impacts, nearly 29 million tons of CO2 emissions that were not avoided because that forest was not cut down. Next slide, please. I'll skip this for now. Next slide, please. And so I want to hand it over to Maria Isabel so she can talk about her experience in Mongabay LATAM.
Thank you so much.
Isabel, if you can unmute yourself. And
okay, thank you so much, Rhett, and thank you everyone for being here. Hi, Linda, nice to see you again. As Rhett said, Mongabay has worked very hard to represent the realities of different regions in the world by establishing these bureaus run by local journalists who report on their local languages. For example, I'm a Peruvian journalist. I'm based in Lima, and I have been running Mongabay Latam for the past 9 years. In these years, we have produced original content in Spanish, and I think we have been made significant achievement by exposing serious cases of corruption, environmental crimes, and also promoting government actions in favor of indigenous communities in different countries. But one big information gap that we have been working on, I think, is how the growing of illegal economies in the Amazon are endangering not only the biodiversity of sensitive ecosystem, but also the life of indigenous people. And let me talk about my country, about Peru. Next, please. As you may know, we are the second largest producer of coca leaf in the world, and coca leaf is the main ingredient to make cocaine. Violence has always existed in my country, but we realized that after the pandemic, there was an increase of this violence in a specific region in the Peruvian Amazon. In 1.5 years, around 15 indigenous leaders who opposed the expansion of drug trafficking into the territories were killed. So we heard that indigenous leaders reported the advance of drug trafficking, but the public opinion paid no attention, and we wanted to change that. Because we know what they were saying was true. So we have used artificial intelligence and satellite tools to change that. Last year, we partnered with Earth Genome. That's an organization that specializes in the analysis of satellite images. And they have developed a search tool that uses AI to find airstrips in the rainforest. As you can see, an airstrip looks like this with a satellite image. So they gave us the location of these airstrips, and we verified the information on the field. We talked with more than 60 local sources. We visited indigenous communities. Next, please. For example, this one is a picture taken with a drone by one of our reporters on the field. So we corroborated and double-checked hundreds of pieces of data to discover 67 clandestine airstrips linked to drug trafficking just in these 3 Peruvian regions in the Amazon. Next, please. Sadly, 56 of these airstrips are located within or very close to indigenous territories. And in yellow, you can see the coca crops, and the plains are the airstrips. Next, please. And here you can see 2 indigenous communities living with 15 drug trafficking airstrips in and around their territories. And I remember during the investigation, once we received a call from one of our sources in the middle of the night, who told us that he was witnessing how the narcos were loading a plane with cocaine very near to his home. So they are living under very difficult situation, very difficult conditions. Luckily, the information, our stories attracted the attention of the media and the authorities in Peru. We were interviewed several times by news media from different countries, not only to know more about the findings, but also to know how to use these kind of tools to monitor these territories. Also, a congresswoman and a former prime minister addressed the topic. The indigenous leader asked for this information to advocate with the authorities. They told us that these kind of maps and images gave them the facts to back their claims. And recently, Air Force authorities requested a meeting with us because they want that we teach them how to use this kind of technology to know what's happening in the territory, and that we provide the information of this investigation. But this is not the only time we have used these kind of tools to reveal the extent of environmental damage. Next, please. This is an investigation into the environmental legacy of the oil industry. We made this investigation in 4 countries, in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. And we identify and also georeference 8,000 contaminated sites in these countries. These liabilities look like this one that you are seeing in this image. And by georeference this data, we revealed the extent of this liability in indigenous territories. Next, please. More than 600 liabilities overlap with 50 indigenous territories and 15 protected areas in the Amazon. The worst part is that 70% of these liabilities have not been remediated. So we have all these oil stains and spills in the middle of the rainforest, and nothing is doing, nothing to do to try to remediate these problems. Next, please. These are satellite images of oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico. As you may understand, the oil companies conveniently said that any oil stains in this part of the oceans are natural emanations, because there are natural emanations as well in this part of the ocean. So we partner with a group of scientists that have analyzed thousands of satellite images like this to distinguish when these oil stains are natural emanations and when they are oil spills that come from the extraction wells. And this research helped us to expose that in 6 years, about 60% of the oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico have gone underreported. So once again, we have been our reporters have been interviewed by important news media in Mexico, and also a congresswoman addressed the topic, and a civil society organization requested a meeting with us because they are analyzing the possibility to start legal action against the Mexican government. And finally, next, please. These red dots that you see here moving, yes, these are a fleet of more than 200 Chinese vessels fishing on the edge of the sea borders of several Latin American countries. So we have been using a tool like this, that is Global Fishing Watch, to discover illegal fishing on the open seas. That is also a very underreported topic. In fact, recently we published an investigation on illegal fishing in a protected area in Mexico, and the authorities in Mexico confirmed our reporting and have started legal action against the vessels and the company. So next, please. Finally, I would like to emphasize what Rhett said about our distribution strategy. We really try to maximize the use of our content. We believe that these stories are very important. In Latin America, we have more than 80 partnerships with media outlets in the region. Some of those media outlets are the most important and the most read medias in their countries. And we are working to increase that number because we believe in the power of these stories, and we believe that we can make a really impact with these stories. So thank you.
I'd like to hand it back to Rhett. Thank you so much, Maria Isabel. And Rhett, do you want to finish up the presentation, please?
Yeah, so just real quick, I'm just going to highlight a few things that are next for us. So next slide, please. So Maria Isabel highlighted some great examples of Mongabay Data Studios work. And so the idea is, how do we turn more primary environmental data into actionable stories? That includes helping other journalists beyond Mongabay tell those stories. Next slide. We also are doubling down on impact. So really trying to embed impact thinking into the newsroom processes to drive outcomes. And so one of the key aspects of that is really thinking about audience, and how do we ensure that we reach the key decision makers around an investigation or a feature. So if we do an investigation on, like a oil palm plantation and corruption, let's say, like how are we sure that we're going to reach people who are making investment decisions around that? How are we going to reach policymakers? And so it might involve spin-off stories that target a very specific audience. Next slide, please. And just a really important way to think about this is how do you navigate news avoidance? So across the world, more and more people are avoiding the news for a variety of reasons. Next slide, please. And so there's certain topics that people still do pay attention to, especially explanatory content, solutions, and positive stories. Next slide, please. But one of the big opportunities is really around polarization. And so, next slide, please. If you look at this list of who avoids what type of news, people on the right are identified as being on the right. 64% of news avoiders avoid climate and environment news. And so if you want to get into these issues, you need to think about, well, what are the science aspects or the business and financial aspects or the security aspects? And so you can still reach people who may otherwise be tuning out if you just frame stories in a different way. Next slide, please. Next slide. So then we're continuing to expand, and so we're really targeting growth, and not for growth's sake, but in places where it can have the highest marginal impact. And so that's both geographies via different languages, but also coverage, but then also topics. We're doing more on oceans and planetary health. Next slide, please. And part of that effort is a way to deliver more information in different formats to micro decision makers. So people who are on nature's front line, who are currently underserved in languages and formats that they relate to. Next slide, please. And then really scaling up our solutions journalism, because as I talked about before, expanding hope can lead people to, or expanding solutions journalism can give people more hope, give them a sense of agency and the idea that they can have impact in a small way. And those small impacts can add up and lead to more catalytic systemic change. Next slide. So I'll stop there and hand it over to both to Lily.
Thank you, both Rhett and Maria Isabel, for enlightening presentation. I'd like to just plunge right into our Q&A session. I am going to give you the power to unmute yourself. So let's. So if you do have a question, please feel free to go ahead and pop it in the chat. Either unmute yourself and you can say it out loud to us. And just to start off, Charles had a question in the chat asking, is all of the satellite data open access and free to the public? So either Rhett or Maria Isabel, if you want to chime in here.
Yeah, so not necessarily. So we use a lot of open access data, but then we also have relationships with entities like Planet, which are private systems. So everything we publish is open, but we're using some proprietary sources to bring that information into the public.
Yeah, I just want to add that we have started with trying to teach other journalists how to use some of these tools. Some of them, as Rhett mentioned, are open access, for example, Global Forest Watch or Global Fishing Watch. And we have found a lot of interest in Latin American journalists to learn how to use these tools, because they allow us to know what's happening in territories that are very difficult to access. And because of that, we're part of this operation of this criminal organization. So I think this could be a really interesting shift in how we are doing environmental journalism in Latin America.
Thank you. It looks like Anne, you have your hand up. If you want to go ahead.
Thank you all for a great presentation. Really fascinating. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll keep it to one because other people want to speak, I'm sure. But I will just say on a comment side, Rhett, when you showed the early slides of Napo, the Napo River, it was very familiar to me because my daughter, after high school, went and lived and worked on the Napo River near in Massawa near Tenna for a year. And so we visited her there, and it's astonishing, and the biodiversity is just stunning, and the tragedy of what may come is also stunning. I'm really impressed with your breadth and reach so far, and I wonder about your business model a little more. You said you pivoted to impact, which is great, and so I assume that philanthropy makes up a good deal of your revenue. Is it just philanthropy on which your work is based now? Could you talk a little bit more about that? Is there also an earned income stream? I'd just be curious to know how you've grown so quickly.
Yeah, it's almost entirely philanthropy now. So it's that's institutional foundations, high net worth individuals, and then grassroots donors. We do have one government grant that's about 5%, but we focus on diversification because we don't want to be dependent on any one funder. We want to be able to walk away from any funder, and so no funder is more than 6% of our budget. The earned income is very small at this point, and in some cases, the earned income, like advertising, would actually compete with donations and also degrades the user experience. And so there's kind of an interesting calculus moving. It can be better to not have ads on it if you just get more donations as a result of not having ads.
And it's available free to these news platforms, I gather.
To other news platforms, but also
Yeah.
the general public. There's no paywall or
Right. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So we'll move on to a question from Doug. He says he's impressed with the success and admire our nonprofit model. Where does the funding come from? Oh, that's similar to what Anne just mentioned. So let's see. So Jeffrey also has a question. How do we access your content? And may I filter on region? What is the process for submission of content?
Yeah, so you just come to our website. I mean, that's the easiest way to visit. You can also follow us on social media. On the website, there are a lot of filtering options. So you can filter by geography or topic, or use an and. So you could look at Brazil oceans or India biodiversity. So there's a lot of ways to hone down what you want to focus on. And then you can also do different languages as well, of course. The second part of the question was, sorry, I forgot already.
No worries. It's what's the process for submitting content?
Right. So most of our content comes from journalists, and so we have a whole infrastructure built around pitching stories. There are commentaries that are open to anyone. So we have parameters for how to submit a commentary. And then if you're looking to submit a story idea just for journalists to cover, let's say, rather than write yourself, we also have like a tips line. And so if there's something you become aware of in the world, say you're traveling and you see something or hear something, you can send that to us as a story tip, and then it will go into the newsroom and people will evaluate it as for a potential story. And so all that information is just on the website. You can Google it or you can go to the About section on the site, and there should be a way to find the submission area.
Thank you. Holly also added a link where you can pitch a story as well. So Gary, it looks like you have your hand up.
Thank you. My specialty, by the way, is remote sensing, primarily weather and Earth resource satellites. And I'm very impressed with your use of that data. And my company spends a lot of money analyzing the data, and you guys do it beautifully. My question is, how can we help you in your mission? What roles do you see this audience taking?
Thank you, Gary. That's wonderful with your remote sensing background. I wanted to introduce someone else who hasn't spoken yet, who's at Mongabay. He is the Director of Philanthropy, Dave Martin. He also happens to be my husband, and we together we direct his family's foundation. So he can speak to this from a couple different angles. So Dave, I wanted to, if you can take it away.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for taking the time today to learn a little bit about our organization. I've been with Mongabay about 10 years, and it's been great to witness the maturation of our newsroom and the type of reporting we're doing. I have to say, Maria Isabel, and Rhett with the United Cacao story, you know, I used to live in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and I felt powerless to what was going on. And just seeing the incredible tools that can, and the solutions journalism that you all are producing is really inspiring for me, and it's giving me energy today. So thank you for that. So ways people can get involved, you know, very you know, at the easiest level of entry, engage with our content. You are all a group of people who are extremely impact oriented. You know, you've made a decision to kind of take another turn at your career to be to make the world a better place, and I respect that a lot. So to have an audience like you that is engaging with their content, sharing the content with the right people, that goes a long way. So that's pretty easy, and I think it'll be a really interesting learning experience along the way. Another thing we're trying to do right now that you all can be involved in is we're trying to expand our community. We've really, you know, we're a youngish organization. We've been a nonprofit for about 15 years, and we're gaining more notoriety. Rhett showed the, you know, our expansion on a chart, and it's, you know, you can see it's steady, sustainable growth. But these are the moments that we don't have very often, to have such an engaged conversation with change makers. So how you know. I'm open to talk on the side, of course. We would love to continue the conversation. We put on events in California and New York, and we'd love to do events elsewhere. We would love to have you join us. Yeah, I think I'll probably just end it there. There's been a number of questions about how we're a nonprofit and where our funding comes from, so I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But you know, we would love to talk to you. Linda, Charles, Gary, David, they all have our emails and our contact information. So I know this time is coming to an end. I'm happy to stay on a little longer too to discuss anything. But I think those are the best ways. Engage with our content, reach out, say hello. We have a lot of opportunities for you all. Thank you.
Dave, will you be at Climate Week? There's a question in the chat about that in New York. Will Mongabay be there? There's sort of an invitation to get together with some folks from ALI.
Yeah. So we will have a few people there. I'll be there. We're not doing an event this year. We did a couple last year, but we will be present. So happy to chat about that.
Nicole was asking about that.
Great. And Anne, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. So I had a 3-year partnership with the Yale program on climate change communication, which I'm sure you know very well, Public Voices on the Climate Crisis. And the reason I mention it is because, I mean, there's some synergies with what you do, but one of the things that really struck me about my time with Yale, YPCCC, is that they did a study. This goes back to something you said, Rhett. They did a study about people's reaction to the climate crisis, deforestation, all of this stuff. And what they found, and maybe the numbers are a little bit dated, but what they found was that 20% of the people are very aware of climate change, of the danger it poses, and so on. 20% either refuse to even look at it or consider it, or don't acknowledge it, say it's a hoax. And 60% are the worried middle. And one of the things that makes them worried is, you know, it's such an intractable, huge problem. There's no solution, so why engage? And so I think that represents a huge opportunity for organizations like Mongabay to bring them the facts and, as you said, hope and solutions. That is how we have to kind of transform them from, you know, anxiety to action, or at least some of them. So I just wanted to share that statistic because I think it really chimes with what you all were saying.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Thank you so much, Anne. And this brings us to the close of the presentation. Thank you, everyone, for showing up and for participating. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I just wanted to let you know that we would love to continue dialogue with anyone who's interested. Charles and Linda will be sending an email out in the next few days with some contact information, so that you can get in touch with us. And if you want to hear more about our business and impact model and about our growth during this time of media decline, we'll be going into that in more detail with the ALI New York Metro Group. That webinar will be on October 13th at 5 p.m. Eastern. And to register for that, please get in touch with David Jaffe, the New York Metro organizers, and they can get you signed up for that. So with that, I'd like to end this presentation. I'll stop the recording, and thank you so much again for being with us.